So hello and welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about getting started in design. There are a variety of different designs, careers that you can get into: graphic design, web design, user experience, user interface design, and motion design. And in tonight's seminar, we are going to be talking about these different types of design and the things that designers will be doing in them, the apps that you would use, and we're going to give you an overview of these different types of design so that you can hopefully get an idea of which one you might be interested in and the things that you need to learn if you want to get started in these areas. The presentation URL here for all of you who are attending live, I'm going to paste that address into the chat for those attending the live stream, and for anybody watching the recording, I'll make sure that that is in a link in the video description below or somewhere in the web page that you're viewing this on. And so it's nobledesktop.com/presentation/get-started-in-design. And we keep these presentations up so you don't have to worry about them going away. And when you're in this presentation, you can use the buttons down here to navigate back and forth, or you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard. You can also swipe if you're on a touchscreen device, such as a phone or a tablet. You can swipe through here and there will be lots of useful information in here, links to websites. We'll talk about apps that you'll need to learn, portfolio websites, and we'll have links to a bunch of those things. So hopefully this will be a useful reference for you in the future. And that said, let's get started here. What are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about different types of design, not print design, but digital type design. So, well, graphic design does actually include some print design as well, but more focusing mostly on digital type design. But graphic design, user experience design, user interface or web design, motion design. We'll talk about what designers do, show examples of work, talk about the apps that designers use so that you will know which apps you'll need to learn if you're going to get into these industries, and what type of computer you might need if you're getting into it, if you have any questions about that, and show example portfolio websites. That'll be important because the design industry is focused around portfolios showing that you can do the work. This is your kind of, while you do have a resume, your real kind of resume, if you will, is your portfolio. The portfolio is how you show people what you're capable of. And to be honest, when I get a resume from somebody, I could care less about reading the resume. I want to go to their website. I want to see their work, because if the work is bad, it doesn't matter what's on the resume. It's bad work. The website portfolio is the example of the things that you are capable of doing as a designer. So when I get an email or I get a resume, if I'm going to look at that designer and review them, I want to just click the link to go to their website, check that out as quickly as possible, and then if I'm interested, I will go back and read the resume and take a look over that. But I'm really curious about the website first and foremost. So we'll show you some examples of portfolio websites, because if you're getting into the design industry, you would need to create one. It doesn't matter what kind of design you're getting into. All designers need a website to show examples of what they are capable of. And it doesn't matter whether you're trying to get a job at a company, whether you're trying to attract client work, where you're trying to directly work for someone. Everybody needs some sort of website to show what services or capabilities you have to potential employers or to clients that you're trying to get. So as a quick introduction to myself, my name is Dan Rodney. I'm an instructor and course developer at Noble Desktop, and I do all sorts of different types of design. I actually do graphic design. I do user interface and web design. I do motion design. I do a wide variety of things. I've been doing this for over 20 years and have gotten into all different types of design over the years. Started as a graphic designer, and I wanted to learn how to create websites, so I quickly learned how to design and code websites. Eventually wanted to start doing more videography, so got into videography as well. So I got into animation, and I just like all different types of design. To me, they're all fascinating and interesting and have their own unique aspects that keep life interesting, being able to do a little bit of each. Don't feel like you have to learn all different types of design. You should, when you're first getting started, focus on an area of design. You might eventually branch out and start to get into other areas, but you should try to focus in first on the one that you're most interested in. And then if you want to go into other areas, you can always go into those later on. And so that said, let's go ahead and get started here. And just going to click back into my presentation and hit the next arrow. So how do you get started? First of all, you need to figure out what kind of design you're most interested in. There are lots of different types of design, so it's kind of obvious you need to figure out which one you're most interested in. That's why we're going to talk about a bunch of them tonight, so that it will hopefully narrow down your decision to see what you're interested in doing. You will need to learn design concepts as well as apps that you will be using to design with. So we'll talk about the software that you'll use and go over for each industry what apps you would need to learn, because you're going to need to be able to do these types of design using specific apps. And so in addition to learning the apps are just the tool. A hammer does not make you a carpenter. A saw does not make you a carpenter. Just like a design app doesn't make you a good designer. So you also need to learn, in addition to the apps, you need to learn the concepts behind what makes good design. Typography, color, composition, user interaction, animation, those kind of things. What makes good design? How do I create design? And then in the app, how do I actually functionally make the thing happen? But you need to be able to be doing good design as well as actually executing those designs. So those are the two main concepts of design concepts and apps. And you don't become a good designer overnight. You do need to practice becoming better at the craft. Just like if somebody teaches you some dance steps, you don't just instantly be like, yeah, I'm a perfect designer. Like, thank you for teaching me the cha-cha. Like I'm an expert at it now. No, you need to practice it. You might see how the steps go, but that doesn't mean you're good right away. Same thing with design. You need to learn the apps, but you're going to need to practice with those. You're going to need to learn about design concepts, but you might hear them, but do you really get them? Like, have you ingrained it into your workflow? Practice, practice, practice. The more you do design, the better you're going to get. The more you do it, the faster you're going to get good. So this is not a learn it tonight, be an expert tomorrow kind of thing, but it is definitely an achievable thing that if you want to become a designer, you want to learn these apps, you want to learn design concepts, if you put effort into it and you learn it and you practice it, it's something that I think people that want to do it, that they can do it. And ultimately, you need to build a portfolio that as you're practicing, as you're creating projects and you're creating work, hopefully some of that work is going to be good and you're going to like it. And you're going to put that into our portfolio to show that you are capable of doing good design work. And over the years, as you are doing work, that portfolio will grow with you. As you become a better designer, you will replace your early projects with better projects and the ones that you're more proud of. And as you're growing and becoming a better and better designer, your portfolio will only get better and better as you keep doing this. So graphic design, let's talk about that first. Graphic design is the very general industry. It's a huge industry that incorporates a lot of different types of design because it's really any sort of visual communication that uses artwork, combined images, text. It's visual communication. So it's very broad. If you say you're a graphic designer, you could be a web designer, you could be an app designer, you could be all sorts of things. Most of the time people will say the kind of specific design they're in, but in general that is all some type of graphic design. So this could be designing logos, ads, social media graphics, websites, books, apps, all sorts of things that you could be designing. It's print medium, web, presentations, like slide presentations, like doing PowerPoint design. There's graphic design in that. So there's all different types of ways that you can do design. And it's not limited to just one type of medium. Now, when somebody says, I'm a graphic designer, graphic design's been around a long time. And in the early days, a lot of it was focused on print design. So sometimes if somebody says they're a graphic designer, some people will think that they're an older school graphic designer doing print design. But in general, graphic design is all these types of design. So some people associate it with that. I'm not saying that you should associate it with that. I'm just saying that just to be aware that if you say you're a graphic designer, some people may take that as that you're saying that you're a print designer. Because generally when people do web design or user interface design or app design, they use other terms. Like they might say, I'm a web designer, or I'm a visual designer. What's a visual designer different than a graphic designer? It's just people wanted a different, newer term than graphic design, because graphic design has been around so long, it's so generic, that they wanted something that was maybe a bit more specific. Now, visual design, like, isn't visuals the same as graphics, kind of? You're right, it is. But visual design is a little bit newer. It's typically more meaning digital design specifically, whereas graphic design might mean more print. So it's graphic design doesn't mean just print, but some people might take it that way. So just to be aware of how people's impressions might be if you say I'm a graphic designer. So for an example, logo design. Ignacio here has a great website for logo designs. Such a brilliant logo designer here. And Nutriversity here with the forks being the columns. Such a clever icon here for the logo. If I go back to the other pages in his website, he's an amazing logo designer. Debugging, the D, the E, and the B become a little bug. Beautifully designed, so smart and visually appealing. He does so many good logos. Wild Ventures, I love this one. Wild Ventures, he's got this eyeball with the elephant in the eyeball, and the type is beautiful. It's something that is playful and yet is kind of timeless. You know, it's not too funky in that it would be dated. So it's just a very smart logo designer. Furniture Taxi. It's so simple, but yet so elegant. It's a piece of furniture and it looks like a taxi, you know? Clean, easy. Like the best logo designs, I feel like when you see them, you're like, you just say, of course. Like it's the perfect thing. You just know it's right. Bad logos, you're like, oh man, look at that bad logo. Like, you know, but when you look at a good logo design, it doesn't mean that was easy to come up with. In fact, I would say the exact opposite. Sometimes the most obvious looking solution, like when you see it, you're like, of course, that was great. But would you have thought about that? You know, with something like Nutriversity, like you look at that, you're like, of course, like that's a genius idea. But so many people would not come up with the forks being the columns. You know, Pajama Nation here. It's a flag that are pajamas. You know, it's hard to make such an iconic, simplified form of a concept. And so, you know, creating something that is visually simple, quick and easy to scan, unique, it's very challenging. It can take a long time to come up with the idea. You go through lots of ideas that are not very good, and logo design, if you've ever tried it, you know that it's a challenge to do. And if you haven't tried it, you're like, oh, it's just a little thing to do, right? Like there's not too much to it, but it's all about the concept and the idea behind the logo, simplifying something to its core. And so it's much harder than you might actually think. Like AutoWiz here, this is great. Like there's actually the W of the Wiz is in the W of the wizard. And, you know, AutoWiz, wizard, there's a W. There's also kind of like forming an A for the auto. Like just lots of little things that he's done that really make for good logos and good color schemes. Yeah, just brilliant work here. Such a great designer. So that's one example of a type of design. Book design. I used to work in a design studio that did a lot of books, and when I told people, hey, I do book design, they're like, oh, you do the jacket, like the thing on the outside? I'm like, yeah, that's one of the things I do, but I also do like the hundreds of pages that come in between. Like once I worked on a book that was 1,000 pages. It was Jansen's History of Art. It's an art history book that is used in a lot of colleges. It's pretty much like one of the standard college history textbooks, and it's literally 1,000 pages. They actually, for colleges, make it into splits. They split it into like a 500-page book and a 500-page book, because college students don't want to carry a 1,000-page book with them to class, and you can't cover 1,000 pages in one semester typically. So they often split it into a first and second book. So, but yeah, so book design, interiors, exteriors of books, somebody's got to design it. They've got to design the jacket or cover on the outside, and then all the pages that come in between. And that Jansen's History of Art, that took a year to do that whole project. Not just only working on that project. Of course, we were Design Studio working on lots of other projects as well, where I was working at the time. But that was one of multiple projects, and the timeline for that was a year. Laying everything out, doing the typography, creating the composition, building everything out takes a long time. I noticed a comment in the chat saying, "I'm always afraid I'm not creative enough for graphics and logo design." It's an interesting thing. Creativity, I would say, in general, for design, not just logo design, but creativity in general, is something that can be a challenge for some people trying to get into design. And what I like to tell people is try to have a playful mind. And like if you ever watch little children, they just say the craziest stuff. Like there's no filter on them. They just say whatever they think. Their mind just goes in all sorts of directions. Like they don't have any rails on them. Like they have no borders, no boundaries. Their mind goes all over. And it's just this boundless creativity that they have. And then as we get older, we start to learn like, oh, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do this, and we kind of play by the rules. And with design, I think you have to try to get back to like a playful mind. Like let your mind wander, think about different things, and also if you look at design, like actually going out there and looking at it and analyzing it, looking at what people are doing, seeing how they're using color, seeing how they're creating ideas, let your mind kind of be influenced by examples of good design, and just try to come up with stuff, like come up with just a ton of different things. And the thing you don't see that designers do is that you don't see all the bad ideas. In most cases, like all the logos that Ignacio did, he didn't show you all the failures that he did, like to get to some of those. He might have gone through 50, 60 ideas till he got to that one. So don't feel like that the best logo designers come up with that right away. I would say definitely the opposite is true. It takes a while typically to get to a good logo design. Now, sometimes you're rare and you just, the perfect idea just popped into my mind right away. But you also kind of put that seed in the back of your mind and just kind of like let your mind think about it. Sometimes you need to step away from a project and go do other things, and your mind is thinking about it in the backgrounds. And eventually you're like, hey, wow, this idea just popped into my head. And as you're looking at things, like your mind can maybe be thinking about that logo, and maybe you see something that sparks an idea. So try to be kind of playful and see things like go and find some visual stimulus and do interesting different things that maybe gets you exposed to things that might spark an idea. And hopefully that can kind of help your creative side to be more creative about things. And just when you're starting, put ideas down on a piece of paper, or on the computer. I call the first stage of design the get the crap out stage. Like you just got to get the crappy ideas out. Same thing for logos or whatever it is. Like you just got to get the stuff out there, start working, you got to work through all the bad ideas, and you have to try things. Sometimes in your mind, you have a great idea in your mind and you're like, it sounds so good in my mind. And then you try and you're like, this just does not work. And so you tried it, you move on. It's not your first idea. You don't have to stay with it. You're not stuck. Just let it go. And if it doesn't work, move on to the next thing and the next thing, and just get all the bad ideas out so you can get towards the good ideas. Yeah, the comment in the chat, pixels are cheap. Exactly. Paper's cheap, pixels are cheap. Like just get through all the stuff till you can get down to the good ideas. Part of, like especially in a logo design, is getting to the core concept. And sometimes you have to get through the bad ideas, and you're actually getting towards your final result because you're learning what doesn't work. And that's important because you're like, okay, that doesn't work. And that means you have fewer things that will work. So you're getting towards an answer of things that will work by getting rid of the bad ideas. So social media graphics, another thing that people create. Somebody has to go through and design those social media graphics that you see, whether they're ads on social media site or graphics that companies share. They want to share some information. Like in this case, this is an organization that's trying to get the word out about various different issues that they want to talk about. So they want to create some social media awareness images. So a designer creates these images and they post them onto this website, and then people can download those or share them on Facebook, Twitter. So they're actually designing these and saying, hey, let's raise awareness. Please share our images that we've made. But companies need social media presence. Somebody needs to design those graphics that they post on social media. So that's a big portion of graphic design these days, is creating graphics for social media. Somebody was asking in the chat, depends on what kind of paper depends on what kind of paper you're using. True. Some papers are very expensive, but you can, for the ideas, you don't use the expensive stuff. Use the cheap stuff for your ideas. PowerPoint design. Now, this might be something that a lot of people don't associate with good design. I'm not talking about the default included PowerPoint presentation themes. I'm talking about designing your own custom PowerPoint presentations. Presentations, if they look bad, it's because they either weren't designed or they had a bad designer. Presentations can be beautiful. It doesn't have to look like PowerPoint. Looking like PowerPoint means using one of the stock default included themes, but you can design your own custom PowerPoint presentation that doesn't have to look like anything normally seen in PowerPoint. And so you can do beautiful PowerPoint design. PowerPoint's actually a very capable, very powerful program. And let me just turn down the sound here. We'll be posting this on Facebook, so I can't always reproduce people's sounds. So there are sounds. If you're watching this on your own computer, you can listen to the sound that goes along with it. But just pay attention. First of all, let me back up a second. Watch the animations. These are animations within PowerPoint. So beautiful design, beautiful transitions. Are they the stock transitions that are included in PowerPoint? No, they're animations, custom animations. You can create your own custom animations in PowerPoint. Same thing also in Keynote as well. And so when you go beyond the stock default transitions, just a slide transition, when you get into custom animations with custom designs, you can do beautiful work. And it doesn't look like PowerPoint. It doesn't look like Keynote because it's not the stock default thing that is the same thing that you've seen a bunch of times before. So you can do custom design, custom animations, and you can do beautiful work. I know a woman who's been working in doing PowerPoint stuff for like 20 or 30 years. That's all she does for a living, is she is a PowerPoint designer. And there's other people in the PowerPoint business area. Now, typically they're going to work on PC because most of the businesses are PC, they're Windows oriented. And even though PowerPoint was a Mac only program before Microsoft bought it, yes, Microsoft did not create PowerPoint. They purchased it from a Mac only software company, and they turned it into a Mac and PC app. Nowadays, it's Microsoft, so they prefer Windows, so they do make PowerPoint better on Windows. The Mac version is quite good, but it's not as powerful as the PC version. So if you're doing a lot of PowerPoint, it is better to work on Windows because most people in the business area are on Windows, and the PowerPoint version on Windows is more powerful than the Mac. But you can actually do most things on the Mac these days, and PowerPoint on the Mac is quite good. So you can technically do it on either one. But you can do beautiful PowerPoint design, and that's an area of design that a lot of designers don't want to go to, because a lot of designers, traditional designers, graphic designers, visual designers, they like Adobe Apps. And Microsoft apps work differently. To be honest, they're not as intuitive. But that means that a lot of designers don't know PowerPoint. And so it's more of a niche area. But if you're a designer that's a good designer and you know PowerPoint, then that's an area where there's just not going to be as much competition in that area, because there's not as many people not as many designers willing to use PowerPoint. I've definitely had a lot of designers that are like, oh man, if I had to do PowerPoint presentation design, I would just quit as a designer. That's the attitude of some designers, but that's not the attitude of all designers. To me, good design is good design. It doesn't really matter what app you're using to create that design. You could do beautiful presentations. So it's not your most common area of design, but it is another area of design. So as far as general graphic design, kind of main high-level generic design, of course the Adobe apps are popular here. So Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. Photoshop is a pixel-based editing tool, so it's definitely for editing photos, but it's way more than just a photo editor. It's also used by graphic designers to create all sorts of pixel-based design. So you can do patterns, you can do graphics, you can do social media graphics, you can design websites, apps, you can design all sorts of things. You can do photo editing, color retouching, color correction, retouching, all sorts of things. But Photoshop is very versatile. So it's photo and graphics. InDesign is page layout. So if you're creating anything from a single page to many pages, InDesign is kind of the meeting place of graphics and type, mainly focused on print. Even though you can do other things with InDesign, like it can create beautiful PDFs. If you want to create a beautiful PDF, InDesign is the great way to do that. But its main focus is on print. So it's for magazines and books, and it can do some digital stuff, but that's not its main focus. It's mainly a print thing that you're doing. Somebody was saying that they thought that they were stuck with the PowerPoint templates. You're absolutely not stuck with PowerPoint templates. That's just the default. You can completely customize and make everything 100% unique in PowerPoint. Adobe Illustrator, that's for drawing and creating things like logos. So if you're going to do logo design, Illustrator is what you'd use. Packaging design, fashion design, they're all using Illustrator. So Illustrator is a vector drawing tool. Vectors are these crisp, clean, mathematically described lines. You don't have to do math, don't worry. But behind the scenes, there's math behind it so that it can be crisp and clean and beautiful no matter what size. And so something like a logo, you want to make it any size you want, you got to do that in Illustrator. If you make a logo in Photoshop, it's going to be pixel-based, and pixels are these little square blocks that when you blow them up, they become pixelated and blocky and they don't look very good. So when you're drawing logos and icons, Illustrator is the best place to do that. So Illustrator is good for drawing, icons, logos, fashion design, packaging design, all different areas. And finally, PowerPoint, even though that's definitely a niche area, that I just threw it in there just because most designers wouldn't think of doing that. We do have a graphic design certificate that teaches things like Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. If I go to the syllabus here, we teach InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator. Now those are just the apps, but then earlier I said you don't just only learn the apps, you also want to learn the design concepts. In our graphic design bootcamp, that's where we teach the design concepts of what makes good design. So composition, typography, color, that type of stuff. So you want to know the tools of the trade, but also the concepts behind good design. So that's graphic design in general. With UX design, UX is user experience design. So this is a bit different. This will always have, in the end, some sort of visual that typically that people are going to see, but that's not the goal of what the UX designer is focused on. Now, I say usually having some sort of like visual to it, because most UX that we're talking about are user experience for apps, for websites, but technically there doesn't have to be a visual component to an experience, right? An experience could be you going to a restaurant and being welcomed by someone, being led to the table. Do they bring out an appetizer or not, for you to snack on while you're deciding, what's the whole experience? A UX designer could do something with that experience. And so there's not necessarily visuals, but typically there is. So websites and apps, there's functionality. There's an experience of using those. What's that experience like? So a user experience designer, they think about the customer experience. They want to make sure that it's easy for somebody to do something, that it's intuitive, that they can figure it out, and that it meets and kind of gets the customer's needs, so that if you're creating an experience and you have not thought ahead of time what that customer needs, that customer is going to be disappointed because you're not going to meet their needs. So the idea is that we call it user-centric design or user-centered design. And so often it includes researching users to know who are the people we're going to be working with, who's going to be using our website, who's going to be using our app that we're going to be doing. And by getting to know them, we can create a better product because we're going to anticipate their needs, but we have to know what their needs are. We have to know who it is, why they care about certain things, what's going on in their life that's going to bring us to this service or this website or this app. And then doing a design, testing it on people, making sure that what we figured out is actually good and that it's easy to use, that it's intuitive. These are just some of the things that get involved in user experience design. So I like to call UX design people person design, because you do want to be a people person. Some people are very egocentric in that they're like, well, I want to do what I want to do, and it's all about them and what they want to do in design. It's not about the other person. And for some kinds of design, that can be fine. For user experience design, it would be horrible. In user experience design, you want to be able to have empathy. You want to be able to understand other people. And so we have a whole blog article if you want to read more about what user experience design is like. You can read more about that in this article here. I'm going to keep talking about it here though. So examples of user experience design. So let's take a look. So what might a user experience designer deliver? Now, every project's a little bit different, but these are just some examples of things that you might deliver as a UX designer. So see things like empathize with users, right? Define the problem, generate ideas, prototype, which means to kind of turn it into something that you can test. Like a usable prototype is something you can give to a user to do some testing. So you kind of have to learn about your audience, see what the problems are or see what their needs are, generate your ideas, and then make something that you can test, because it's user-centered design. If there's no user in the design, then it's not about user experience, right? It is called user experience. So things like personas, they help you to keep in mind the kind of people. So based on user research, you're going to kind of find certain types of users. And by creating a user persona, giving them a name, giving them some specifics like, do they have children? Where are they located? Do they have a job? What are important for them? What are their needs? So we can refer to, let's say, Melissa in this case, throughout the project. We can say, well, you know what? Melissa isn't going to do well with this. Or like, oh, that's really good. Melissa's going to like that. And so it makes it easier to make sure that you're making everybody happy. Even though these are fictional people that you're coming up with, these fictional personas, they're all based on reality. So they're based on people that you have interviewed or surveyed or somehow found out that you have users that are this kind of person. So it's a fictional thing based on real life information. And so you create a certain number of these kind of personas here, and then you can make sure you keep in mind and try to keep all of them as happy as possible throughout the design process. You can create different ideas through kind of storyboarding out how they might do certain things. And then you plan out, okay, so they're going to do this in the app, they're going to do that in the app, and you kind of map out like what's their journey going to be like. So you're thinking about those people going through your app or going through your experience of what's that process going to be like. I'm going to go from this screen to this screen. So you come up with ideas. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but let's just go through. Then eventually you can create some prototypes. Initially, you might start with very low fidelity, like very rough prototypes, just to get the idea across. And then you make them better quality, more high fidelity prototypes, which really might end up looking a lot like the final app or the final website. And based on those prototypes, you might make them interactive so people can test, and you can actually show them to people and do some testing and see, how were they? Did people get it? Did they have any problems? And if there were problems, then you can fix those things. And so you can learn a lot from your users and testing on users and getting feedback, and incorporating that into your design makes a better overall experience. So here is a portfolio of a UX researcher and designer. So she's saying right off the bat that she researches users, so she gets to know users and does design. And so you can learn about her journey here, and talks about some case studies. A lot of times UX designers have case studies. They don't just have like a visual portfolio of like, look at how pretty this looks. In a user interface designer or a visual designer, it's about how nice things look. It's about making beautiful things. But with a UX designer, it's more about how it works and how it functions. What they do is not necessarily going to initially look pretty. They might hand that off to a visual designer or a user interface designer who's going to make it look nice. But for the UX designer, they're really caring about how something works. So they're going to learn maybe what competitors are doing, look at the content of the website or the app, figure out where the hardships are, like what are the problems, figure out how people are going through the app. Maybe they look at how they currently are doing it. Maybe they then think about how they should be going through. Can we simplify the process? Can we make it easier? Can we make it more intuitive? There might be lots of information. How do you organize all that information? You could do things like card sorting, where you give people a bunch of cards and say, you organize this in a way that makes sense to you. And so instead of you as a single person organizing things the way that you think makes most sense, what's interesting is when you ask other people to do it, you start to see trends of like, well, even though I wouldn't do it that way, everybody else did. So that's interesting. And so this is where your ego needs to kind of get out of the way. And you need to go with, well, I can't change how other people think. I have to respect that that's how they think, and I have to try to work as well with that mindset as possible. We all come from different perspectives. So some things that make sense to one person isn't going to make as much sense to somebody else. But what's the best way that we can do this, that we are the easiest to use for the most amount of people? So things like organizing your menus or organizing categories. Who even decides what those categories are? So you can have users help you to decide what the categories are. You can then wire up a basic prototype, a low fidelity prototype, to say, okay, they'll go from here to here to here. And then maybe that's a basic thing that you can test on users to make sure that it'll make sense. So there's a lot of times there's discussion on a UX portfolio website, which will talk about, the problem, what the solution was. And so it really has to get into the process, because user experience design is a process. It's not just about, here's a pretty screen, it's beautiful, you like it. It's, well, what was the problem? How did you solve it? How did you verify that you actually solved it? And, it's a process. And so it often requires visuals as well as words being written here. So as far as apps for user experience design, so Sketch is a Mac-only app. Sorry, Windows users, they don't make Sketch for Windows. Now, there are other programs that you can use that are like it, but one of the apps that a lot of people like to use is Sketch. Adobe XD is, so there's actually 3 programs: Figma, Adobe XD, and Sketch. These are the 3 programs that a lot of UX and user interface designers also use. And Figma is a web app, so that works on Mac and PC. Adobe XD, that works on Mac and PC because Adobe pretty much always makes their stuff work on Mac and PC. Sketch is the only one that's Mac only. There are a lot of designers that use Mac. There are designers that use Windows as well, but predominantly a lot of the design industry is more Mac-based. But for the most part, you can do things on either Mac or PC, but just know that more designers prefer Macs than they do PCs. It used to be in the early days of design that you had to use a Mac because the software just didn't exist or it wasn't good on Windows. But these days, almost everything works equally well on Mac and PC. So, but more designers are going to use a Mac. So this is a Mac only app. But Sketch, Adobe XD, Figma, they all do essentially the same thing in that you can do designs, you can do some prototypes. There are other software out there as well. There's things like Axure and Envision. So there's not one app that rules the entire UX industry. Right now, I would say that probably Sketch and Adobe XD are kind of the leaders, Sketch being the most popular one. A lot of UX and UI designers like using Sketch. Adobe XD came later, so it's trying to catch up, but it has Adobe behind it. So they're a serious competitor, and they're really trying to vie for this market, and they're getting better and better. So even though they're late to the game, they are catching on quickly, and more people are starting to use them. Somebody was asking if I've heard of Canva. Canva is, it's not as used as much in the professional design industry. It's more, I haven't used Canva myself personally, but I've seen people that are using it and the types of things that they do. From what I've seen, and this is said by somebody who hasn't actually used it, so take that with a grain of salt. But from what I've seen, it's more choosing from templates, and it seems more consumer oriented of let's choose from some templates, change out the text, change out the photos to customize it, but it seems a bit more templated in its design. I could be wrong on that, but I typically I've never come across a design industry so far, a design studio using Canva yet. So that's my impression of what Canva is. So typically when you're talking about Adobe apps, they are not so intuitive for consumers because they're kind of a blank slate. Like Adobe XD, when you open it up, they're not going to give you designs because they figure you're a designer. You want to create everything completely custom yourself. Same thing with things like Sketch and Figma. You start off with a blank slate. Now to a non-professional designer, that blank slate is like the scariest wall they've ever seen. They're like, I don't know what to do. And so for consumer-oriented design apps, it's more about templated, like pre-made, nice-looking designs that you customize. Whereas professional design apps, a lot of times people, when they kind of go from consumer-grade design apps to professional grade, they think they're going to get better quality designs, but they actually are surprised when they're like, oh, you don't give me any designs? And Adobe's like, but we're giving you a tool to create your own designs. And so that's really professional grade programs are about you being the designer and coming up with something completely from scratch yourself using these pro tools. It's not about them giving you good looking graphics and good looking designs. You're there to create the designs yourself, to create completely custom, unique designs. So like, for example, somebody thought that PowerPoint, you could only use their presentations, like their built-in themes. So, but you can, right? So Adobe doesn't give you like pre-made themes because they don't want everybody doing the same stuff. They want you creating completely custom, unique stuff. So we do have a variety of UX design classes, and we even have a combination certificate which does user experience and user interface design. I'm going to talk about user interface design. I think that's actually coming up next. But in something like a user interface and user experience design certificate, then in that case we teach things like Sketch. We teach Sketch in this case because it's the most popular one in the industry right now. Although if you are on a PC, you could swap that out with something like Adobe XD. So we do have that flexibility that you could do. And then we have the design bootcamp, the UX design bootcamp, where you learn about the user experience design concepts. So thinking about things like user personas and user research and user testing. What's it like to go through the workflow of becoming a UX designer? So what are the concepts? How do you do UX design in a workflow? Because this is UX and user interface design, we also teach a little bit of Photoshop and Illustrator, because if people are new to the industry, you're going to need to do some photo retouching at least. And it's nice to be able to draw some things as well, maybe draw some icons or something. So we teach at least a little bit of Photoshop and Illustrator, because those are pretty much industry standards that designers typically use. And in the visual design bootcamp, we teach how to make good looking web pages. So this is the design concepts behind web page design. So the Sketch app can be used to do user experience and user interface design. And like I said, if you're on PC and you want to still learn this, you could swap out Adobe XD instead. And Adobe XD would be how you'd create the user experience designs and the visual designs on the computer side of things. Somebody had asked about what kind of certifications we offer. We call them certificate programs, and New York State allows us to offer certificate programs. So they are a New York State authorized certificate program. But in the design industry, it's not about the certification that is the most important thing. The most important thing in the program is the knowledge you get. So it's about what you're learning, not that I have a certificate. On your resume, having a certificate, it's fine, it's good, but the certificate is not what's going to get you the job. In this industry, it's not a certification-based industry. Like, I don't look for a designer that has a specific certification. I'm looking for a designer that has skills. And so later we're going to talk about portfolios, and ideally, it's just if you have a good portfolio, you show that you can do the work. And so if you have a good portfolio, that's how you show that you can do it. The certification doesn't show that you can do it. So really, when we have our certificate programs, that's just so that you can know what you should be taking as a group of classes. But it's really about what you're learning in there. And then you have to create a good portfolio. You have to start practicing, creating good work, and your portfolio is how you get hired in the design industry. So with UI, user interface, or web design, sometimes called visual design, this is about creating anything that's got a visual interface. So apps, websites. It still involves things like layout, typography, color, composition, but specifically for on-screen interfaces. UI design, web design, visual design. I think sometimes people call themselves a visual designer when they do both app design and web design, because they don't want to say both of those. So visual design, it's kind of like a graphic designer, but it is a newer term that people are using. And when you're getting into user interfaces, though, something that's different than something like print is that you can have animation, that there's user interaction of the user doing something. So they click on something, something happens. So that interaction and animation adds another layer of nuance of things to design than a static medium like print. So some people are switching over from print to user interface or web design, and they have to get used to those concepts. If you're getting into it from scratch and you don't have any experience in print design, that's fine too. But it's one of the things that make web design or user interface design kind of fun, because you get to do things like interactions and animations, which you don't get to do in a static medium like print. So I know you've all seen websites before, but just to highlight 3 nice looking websites, because I had said you should expose yourself to nice looking websites. The Stripe website, beautiful website. Notice the animation, subtle animation that's happening up here at the top of the page. They have nice little menus. The menus actually kind of slide between each other, which is nice. And also when I hover over, they kind of 3D, like it's like a little fold out thing, like it swings towards you. A little bit of 3D look there. But just a beautiful site here. Simple design, but they have nice little animations that happen at certain points. This slash here with Stripe, their identity is based on a little bit of a slash in there. So actually in the logo, the T has a slash, the P has a slash, the I has a slash. There's this diagonal that's built into the corporate identity of Stripe. So that's why you're going to see a lot of slashes, kind of this diagonal stripe to Stripe. So you'll see that. You won't see it every single thing, because if they used it too much, you'd kind of get sick of it. But they do use that diagonal in a lot of cases. They have fun little user interface animations every once in a while just to kind of keep things interesting. So just beautiful typography, beautiful illustrations, and really cool little interactive elements. So they just keep it fun to do. Like, do I have to be able to spin that globe around? No, but it's kind of fun too. Somebody's asking in the chat, JavaScript or another coding language for things like drop-down menus. Mostly JavaScript is typically what it's going to be done with. Sometimes some of this could be done with a little bit of CSS, but generally for the more complicated animations, it's going to be JavaScript. Optimo. So this is a really cool site here. Very simple. It's a hat. They sell hats, but little subtle touches that are nice. When I hover over a hat, it tips itself forward a little bit. And, you know, like if you're a gentleman and you meet somebody, you kind of lift your hat up and you tip your hat towards the person in a sign of respect. So it's kind of tipping itself as well as the text moving down. So it's doing that nice little like respectful tipping towards you. Then when you click on it and it goes over to the slideshow, the hat like flies in. And that it flies in and it kind of sits down, it like adds a little bit of life to it because there's this 3D shadow at the bottom that moves separately from the hat. Now I know it's just a simple slideshow, but that instead of it just sliding from side to side, that they added that little extra animation to give a little bit of livelihood and a little bit of life to it, just makes it that much more interesting. So then if I go back to the hats and I click on a different one, they're all the same way, but it just adds a little bit of fun that it slides in there. I mean, these are $1,250 hats. They're really, really expensive hats. So you'd hope that they'd have a good website if they're selling like $1,000 hats. But it's just fun. It's a little teeny twist on a thing that you've seen over and over again. Everybody's seen a slideshow on a website, but this just makes it a little bit unique and adds some life to the hat that makes it fun. Now, Harvard Law Review. If I say this to you, are you imagining a beautiful website? You're probably thinking boring, ugly law website, but you'd be wrong. It's actually a colorful, beautiful website. It's not image heavy, but there are beautiful patterns and colors in here because if the content is just text, let's throw in a little bit of color to brighten things up. And let's go with a beautiful typeface. So it's all about type design, a beautiful italic, a beautiful serif typeface, good type design here, like a nice small column that's easy to read. Side notes that don't require you to go all the way to the bottom, that there's going to be a lot of text over there. And if you need to, you can show it all, but normally it's collapsed so it doesn't overwhelm the page. So they have little diamonds in there just to make the page a little bit more visually interesting. And so they did really good type design with a little bit of color, like it's not quite white. The nav bar up there is solid white, but the page has a little bit of like an off yellow tannish, like an off-white tannish color, so that the contrast isn't quite as bright. It makes it a little bit easier to read. And then at the bottom, they have this beautiful little graphic here for the volume number. You can read next. You can go to that one or go to that one with beautiful typography. Nice little subtle lines for the dividers here. And, it's if you're not going to be able to have a bunch of graphics to liven things up, what are you going to do? Well, they can create some nice patterns and backgrounds here and do really beautiful typography, because if they're going to read a lot, the type better look amazing. And so, yes, the Harvard Law Review is a beautiful website. App design. The thing about app design is you can pretty much do whatever it is you want to do in app design. There's not really a lot of standards in app design, so you can do kind of whatever it is that you want, because you can make your app design stand out. Yes, you could make it look like a typical iOS app or an Android app, but if you want to make your app stand out, you want to make it its own feeling, its own unique user experience. So like a music app is going to function very differently than a food delivery app. And so you need to know the functionality. And this is where, as a user interface designer working with a UX designer, the UX designer is going to think about how this is going to work. What is the flow going to be? What are they going to do first? What are they going to do next? And then the UI designer, the visual designer, is going to make this all look nice. and then they'll hand it off to a developer to create. So websites have a little bit more kind of standardized things. Like most websites have navigation up at the top because that's where people are used to. But with something like apps, there's a lot more creativity, I feel like, that can be done in apps. So some examples there. For designing user interfaces, for designing web design, the same apps that I talked about earlier for UX, Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma, they work for both UX and user interface design. I'd also throw out there Photoshop has been used for many years for not just photo editing and creating graphics, but also for web design. Now, as time goes on though, Photoshop is not ideal for doing web design. There's still a lot of people using Photoshop to do web design because they know Photoshop. But there's a huge movement in the industry towards modern user interface design apps. Things like Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. We're moving from Photoshop to this. But there are still a lot of people in the industry using Photoshop to design their websites. But more and more, they're switching over to Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. But I'm still going to use Photoshop to do the retouching, color correction, and to create some of the graphics. So for me, while I might only use one of these apps, and I say might because it depends on where you work. If you work at a company, they're probably going to standardize for the most part on one of those apps. But if you're a freelancer, if you're working for one company for a while and then switching to another one, it's possible they could be using Sketch, Adobe XD, or Figma. They all basically do the same stuff. They're made by different companies. They're all competing with each other. It'll be interesting to see if all of them survive and are around here for years. Right now, all of them have a lot of dedicated users. So I don't know if one is going to win out over all the rest, but for right now, they are all widely used. In my experience, Sketch and Adobe XD are the ones that are used more in the companies that I'm going into. Figma gets a lot of praise and a lot of talk online, but I just haven't met too many people using it in the industry. Now, maybe I'm just not working with those people that are using it. I know some people that are using it, but not as many as are using Adobe XD and Sketch, in my experience. Adobe Illustrator, I'll also use Adobe Illustrator to draw things, create logos, icons that might go into those apps. And if you're going to code, there are coding apps like Sublime Text, Atom, Visual Studio Code, if you're going to get into the development side of things, which does lead into the question of, if you're a web designer, should you code? If you're an app designer, there's no need. App design and app coding is so much harder than website coding. If you want to learn code, websites are much easier. Designing apps and coding apps are so different from each other because the coding of an app is much more difficult. And so I don't think that app designers need to learn how to code apps, because if you're going to learn how to code apps, you're going to have to spend so much time learning how to code those apps that you may as well just become a developer and earn a lot more money being an app developer, because fewer people are capable of coding up an app because it's just much more difficult to code an app than it is to code a website. So should you code or learn to code a website? Because that is a more attainable skill, or at least learning some code. In my opinion, I think that if you're going to be a web designer, I think at least knowing some code is definitely going to be helpful to you. When we're working in a website, when you're looking at a website, code determines how the website works. The more you understand about how code works, the better you understand about how a website works. And you can talk to developers better. So even if and when I say developer, I mean the coder. So I am both a web designer and a web developer. I do both. I design and I code. And I can't imagine designing without at least knowing some code. And normally when I see other web designers, the best web designers out there often do know at least some code. That doesn't mean that they're coding everything. They'll often work with developers that do some of the code. But I think it helps you to know what's possible. You can talk to developers better. And by making sure that what you're designing is capable of being reproduced, you won't get your designs kicked back by the developer and say, I can't build that. I can't build that. And so you also know how easy or hard something is to implement. What if you're doing a project and something's going to be really expensive and you don't have the budget for it? Or what if it's going to take a long time to do and you just don't have the time to do that? So the more that you're at least aware of what's involved in the coding, it doesn't mean you have to do all the coding necessarily, but the more you're aware of it, the better designer you'll be, I think. It gives you more context for how the workflow goes. And then you can actually do some of the coding yourself if you want to. So I think it's beneficial for people. Somebody was asking about what happened to Adobe Dreamweaver. So Adobe Dreamweaver is a code editor like Sublime Text or Atom or Visual Studio Code. There was a day when Dreamweaver was good. In my opinion, we are far past that day. Dreamweaver's claim to fame was we're an interface for code. So it was meant for coders. It's not a design tool. A lot of people wanted it to be a design tool, but it's not. It never was. It never claimed to be. That's just what people wanted it to be. It's like, I want you to be this. And Dreamweaver's like, but I'm not. I never claimed I was. You just wanted, you read between the lines and you assumed I am something I'm not. So Dreamweaver is not a design tool. It's a coding program, but it's pretty weak at that. It's not the best coding program. And so coding programs, code editors like Atom, Visual Studio Code, those are free, and those are better than Dreamweaver, in my opinion. So I've used Dreamweaver in the past. It's like I started hand coding before Dreamweaver. I used Dreamweaver for a while when the web was much simpler, and then once you kind of got to the point where you outgrew Dreamweaver, and the web kind of outgrew Dreamweaver, then I stopped using Dreamweaver because I realized there were other code editors that were just better. So most people that are developers are using Visual Studio Code or Atom or Sublime Text. My personal favorite is Sublime Text, and if it wasn't using Sublime Text, it would probably be Visual Studio Code. So I've used Dreamweaver in the past, but I don't need to use it anymore. Web animation. We did have a question about web animation. Are they using JavaScript? There's not one specific technology that is used for all animations on the web. Animated GIFs are one of the technologies, and they're used a lot in HTML emails because they work everywhere pretty much. So animated GIFs are super popular. I'll actually show some examples in a moment. After Effects for doing video, so especially social media videos, YouTube, if you're doing animation and video effects, you can also create animated GIFs in After Effects, but After Effects is really powerful for creating animations and video effects. So it can create videos as well as animated GIFs as well. If you're animating stuff within a web page, JavaScript is how you're animating stuff within a web page when it comes to actually building the final web page. In particular, GreenSock is a specific JavaScript library that's focused on animation. It's amazing. It does an amazing job. It's really cool stuff. And somebody was asking a question in the chat, what's the best software to code something like the Hat website? Any of the code editors that I had mentioned, so something like Sublime Text, Atom, Visual Studio Code, any of those code editors is where you would code it. And so something like that Hat website, Optimo, that would probably be using JavaScript. In particular, the GreenSock animation library is what I would use to do the animation of something like that. CSS, cascading style sheets, that can be used for simple animations, especially something like when you hover over a button and it gets a little bigger. It can also be used for a little bit more complex things than that. But once you get to heavier animations, especially interactive animations, JavaScript is going to give you much more control over the animation than something like CSS. So as an example here, this is an animated GIF. This is a simple one, just kind of showing one picture after another picture after another picture. If you ever created a flipbook when you were a kid where you took a bunch of pieces of paper and you made like a circle and you made it bounce up and down by drawing one circle and then on the next page moving it up a little bit and then on the next page moving it up a little bit and then you flipped through and you made a flipbook style animation, that's kind of how GIF animations are. They show one picture and another, and you can create those using Adobe Photoshop. So Adobe Photoshop is good for creating simple animated GIFs. Now, if you want to create something more complex, After Effects lets you create crazy cool videos, animations, and it can also export to animated GIF as well. So something like this would be basically impossible to create in something like Photoshop. Photoshop's good at the simple stuff. After Effects is kind of overkill for a simple animated GIF, but when you want to really do cool, crazy, cool stuff, After Effects is where it's at. Like After Effects will do really cool stuff for animation. And it's not just animated GIFs, it's also for video as well. So some examples of GreenSock JavaScript-based animation. So here, things that are happening, there's a sequence of things happening. Also, a lot of times scroll-based animations where when you scroll, it might happen based on like when you first come into the screen, something happens. But these are typically JavaScript-based animations, and I would use something like GreenSock to do those animations. Here. GreenSock is a JavaScript library. Yes, there was a question in the chat there. This was made with GreenSock. This is quite a number of years old at this point, but it's still really good. It takes a moment to load because it's got a bunch of graphics. It's got sound effects. So when I say that GreenSock is a JavaScript library, I just mean that the functionality is created for you. It's not pre-made things. It's not like pre-made templates or anything, but a library, some people call it a framework, some people call it a library. It just means that the tools are given to you to write the code better. So you can write animation code faster with GreenSock than writing plain vanilla JavaScript. So check this out. Like, this is super sweet. And I don't know how fast this shows through Zoom for those of you who are doing the live stream, but the smoothness of this is so buttery smooth. And I can move this around. There's sound effects. You can get a little Fruit Ninja on this here. And they do these little animations. So super cool stuff here. Super smooth. Takes a little bit to load the animations and load the graphics. It's fun stuff there. So kind of feels like for those of you who were used to Flash years and years ago, like this feels like Flash used to be years ago, but this is all done through GreenSock. And funny little story, GreenSock originally was an animation library for Flash. So GreenSock actually got its start with Flash, and then they completely rewrote themselves when Flash was going away, and now we're still using GreenSock in JavaScript in web pages. So GreenSock has actually been around for a long time. We were using it to animate in Flash. We're also still using it to animate in JavaScript, which is pretty awesome. So we have different web certificates. We have a web design certificate where it focuses on the coding side of things. So we talk about HTML and CSS in our web development level 1, go further into CSS in level 2, CSS layouts with things like Flexbox and Grid. We go into JavaScript, talk about emails. So you can code HTML emails. And we also have Sketch in there because you need to be able to lay out the pages, optimize some graphics, as well as code everything up. So this is kind of a well-rounded website and email, because emails are also created with HTML as well, and graphics certificate. So you learn about the graphics side, the coding side. So it's mainly focused on the coding, but also having the graphics and email in there as well. The web and visual design certificate is a little bit of a different approach here. If we go to the syllabus on that, it is also going to throw in other things. So it kind of builds on top of the other one. It has the coding side, but it's more heavy on the design side as well. So it's heavy on coding and design. So we do the Sketch Bootcamp to learn Sketch. We have a visual design bootcamp, which is our web design class. So you learn the concepts of what makes a good looking website. And there's also a web design portfolio where you're actually going to design and build your own portfolio website as part of the certificate as well. So it's basically taking the web design certificate and then adding on the visual design bootcamp and the web design portfolio. So more on the design, whereas in this one, it's mostly coding with a little bit of design. This one goes heavier on the design in addition to the coding things. And based on a question on the chat, Sketch for wireframing. So Sketch it can do wireframing, it can do high fidelity design, it can do some basic prototyping. So it's for UX and user interface design. So yeah, it can be anywhere from very low fidelity wireframing all the way through high fidelity design. And it can be for UX or UI designers. And anything that we have with Sketch, you can typically swap out the Sketch app for Adobe XD. So if you're on Windows, you can take Adobe XD instead of Sketch. We included Sketch in there just because right now more people are using Sketch, but at some point we might swap out Adobe XD for that because it works on both Mac and PC. But certainly if you want to take Adobe XD, you can swap out Sketch for Adobe XD. And for our final kind of design here, motion design. So motion design is animation, it's video. And it's like graphic design, but with time. So you can still have design concepts, typography, composition, but you're doing it in video and animation. So there's a time element. You're still going to use typography, color, composition, but now you're adding in sound. You're adding movement. So it's like another dimension that you're adding. And don't think of it as just movies. There's tons of motion design. Right now, it's a huge growing area because video is huge right now. So social media is really driving a lot of animation and motion design. Lots of companies are wanting videos for Facebook, for Twitter, for YouTube. So social media, you think about TikTok is one of the fastest growing social media platforms, and it's 100% video. So video is definitely a growing industry right now. And so for websites, for apps, video can be used in so many places. It's not just television. It's not just movies. YouTube has more watch hours than television right now. So there's been a huge shift to online video. That's the main thing. TV and movies, that's a smaller piece of the pie compared to all the use of video. So, you don't have to think about 30-minute, hour videos. We're talking like they could be 30-second videos, 10-minute videos, short little videos. So for motion design, I talked about After Effects doing animation. So After Effects does animation and video effects. So in some ways, it's kind of like Photoshop for video, if you will. So you can do cool animations, you can do animated GIFs, you can create videos, you could do effects for video. And then for video editors, you can use Premiere Pro. So Premiere Pro is going to let you take in a bunch of different video sources. You can switch, you can do transitions if you want, but you can cut from one angle to another, cut down things, cut out the bad parts, and put sound to it. And you can put titles in there if you want as well. And you can create a video using Premiere Pro. We did already talk about JavaScript web animation, so we're not going to focus that now, even though technically that's part of motion design. So now I'm just talking about the things that we didn't talk about previously. So here's an example of something we do in our After Effects, our first level After Effects class. So we created this like rotating wedge where it changes colors and reveals the type. The photo is scaling in the background as this goes through. So if I go back here, watch that the photo's actually getting bigger as this goes on. So the photo's moving, the little wedge that goes around is changing color, it reveals type, it reveals the company logo at the end. So that animation has to be created. As another example here, animated type, kind of cartoon-like things, but type animations, very popular in doing things like explainer videos and stuff, infographics, all sorts of things need to be animated. In Premiere Pro, this is one of the things that we do. Social media. Put some audio to some video, speed up some of the video, fade from one to the other so you cut out the boring parts. Put some titles with it. Speed up past the boring parts. We'll jump ahead to the end there. Enjoy. So if you're getting started with video editing, one time somebody was like, well, I don't have video footage. Like, I can't afford to buy stock videos. Like, how do I get started? Because I don't have a good video camera. So how do I get started doing video editing if I don't have any videos to edit? And one thing I have to say is everybody probably has a decent cell phone in their pocket. And believe it or not, the video quality is probably better than you think. You don't need absolutely amazing video quality to still do good video. The 5S, the iPhone 5S, which couldn't shoot 4K or anything like that, was rated one of the best films at the Sundance Film Festival years ago. And so that was shot with an iPhone 5S. We're on the iPhone 12. So, any decent Android phone or iPhone these days can shoot high definition or even 4K video, and you can get decent video that you can start to do projects for. And don't feel like you have to have actors and stuff. If you go onto YouTube and look up B-roll and look at just all sorts of things that you could do product videography. There's so many things you could do to try to get into video editing, to create your own videos. You don't have to get these videos from somebody else. You can make them yourself. The biggest thing about making your cell phone look better is lighting. So if you just have enough light and you light things well, it's amazing how much better your phone will look when you're doing your video capture on it. So there's really no excuse if you want to get into something like video editing. You can make your own videos with your cell phone. And there's so many different types of videos you can make. You don't have to create something super long. Social media videos, they're generally anywhere from 10 seconds to 60 seconds a lot of times. So don't feel like you have to create a movie. We're not talking about you have to make a film for the Sundance Film Festival. You can just make a short little social media post, a how-to thing, a short quick little ad. Stop motion, that requires a lot of work, but it might be stop motion photos, take a photo, put them together. So it might only be just a couple photos to kind of make some quirky little animation. It doesn't have to be super time consuming. But there's lots of different things you can make. Don't keep thinking big. Think actually small. Think social media to start with, and you'll be able to do it. So we have some motion design classes, you can learn Premiere, you can learn After Effects, or you can get a whole certificate where you're going to learn all of those things. You're going to learn Premiere, you're going to learn After Effects, and there will be a portfolio class where you work on your own projects and put together your own pieces so that you can use it in your portfolio. Now, as far as computers, most computers these days can handle these graphic apps for the most part. So you can use Mac or PC. For the most part, it doesn't matter. There are some exceptions, like Sketch was Mac only. And for example, PowerPoint is better on Windows, although it is available on Mac and PC. So as far as a few tips I would say is, just so you know, most designers do use Mac. You can do work on a PC, but just know that you're going into an industry which is more Mac based. Now, it doesn't mean you can't work. You certainly can. You can use a PC, but there might be some apps like Sketch, Final Cut Pro, which is made by Apple. They only work on a Mac. But PCs can run most of the software, and occasionally, like PowerPoint and AutoCAD, they are definitely better on PC. But it's more of a Mac industry. If you're getting a brand new computer, most people these days are getting laptops. Most laptops these days have what are called SSDs, as opposed to a regular hard drive. A hard drive, when I say a regular hard drive, I mean like a spinning platter kind of hard drive. These days, laptops don't go with the hard drives. They go with a much faster SSD, sometimes called a like flash memory, but typically called an SSD. And that is going to be much faster. And so if you're buying a desktop, though, a lot of desktops, though, they do come with regular hard drives, which are much, much slower. So make sure you get one with an SSD, and it'll be much faster. Like your booting times will be a few seconds versus a few minutes. The hard drive is the slowest part. So don't buy a really cheap computer with a slow hard drive. Get an SSD. On the Mac, they sell something called a Fusion drive on things like an iMac, where if you can't afford an SSD, because SSDs are expensive, so to get a lot of storage on an SSD, it's fast, but it's expensive to get a big drive. The Fusion drive fuses together some SSD for speed and a regular hard drive. It fuses them into one thing. And that way you get a big hard drive that's more affordable than a full-fledged SSD. Granted, the SSD entirely for the whole drive is going to be faster for everything, but the idea of the Fusion drive is it's a matter of, well, we'll give you a little bit of SSD for the speed, and then we'll mix in a regular hard drive so you have a big storage and you won't pay too much. So if you can afford the full SSD, great. But if you can't, at least get a Fusion drive. I just will not buy a computer that has just a regular spinning hard drive in it anymore because it's just too slow these days. You want to make sure you get at least a full SSD or, worst case scenario, a Fusion drive. If you're on Windows, they don't have the Fusion drive. It's just SSD or regular hard drive. So make sure you get the SSD. It's going to be so much faster these days. If you're getting a new computer, or let's say you even have a computer and you just want to get a better monitor, high-res displays. Apple calls them Retina displays, but these high-res displays, these are much higher resolution displays, and especially if you're doing things like user interface design, or if you want to watch 4K video that you're editing, getting something like a 4K or a 5K monitor is definitely recommended. They are more expensive. You can buy a cheap HD monitor for like $100 or $200, but HD is not a high-res display. HD, I know they called it high definition. It was at the time compared to standard definition, but that is not a high-res display anymore. So HD does not qualify. You need to get something like a 4K. Now, if you have an older computer, it's possible your computer can't drive that 4K monitor with high resolution. So it's possible, depending on the age of your computer, you might need to upgrade computers just to even handle this better monitor. So make sure if you're buying this monitor, make sure your computer can handle it. Somebody was asking a question in the chat about graphics cards. This is dependent on your graphics card. So for computer graphics, you need a decent video card. When you go, especially on Windows, if you go with like a cheap laptop, you often get Intel integrated graphics, and they're not that great. They're not going to perform that well, especially if you're doing video editing. Video editing like Premiere, After Effects, they're much more demanding. You need more RAM and you need a dedicated video card. Don't get something with only integrated graphics. The only exception to that is Apple is now making their new M1, the Apple Silicon processors, and those technically have integrated graphics, but Apple's integrated graphics are not like Intel's. Apple's integrated graphics are amazing. The M1, everything that I've seen about the new Apple Silicon laptops is that that's the way to go. Compatibility isn't as great right now with all the software, but the software is quickly becoming native, and for the most part, it seems like a lot of the software works well enough through the translation that they do, which is Rosetta 2. And if I was buying a laptop now, if you're in the range of like the MacBook Air or the smaller MacBook Pro, I would definitely get the M1 because that's the future. And everything's going to become native pretty quickly, I think. Some of the Adobe apps, they're going to take a little longer. They're going to come out next year. But even in emulation mode, they still work very well from everything that I've seen so far. Now, if you need to use a certain app, make sure you check on compatibility. But for the most part, it seems like it's quite good. Now, I like to use a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and they don't have an M1 version of that yet. So I'm looking forward to the day when they release a new 16-inch MacBook Pro. And now I just got my 16-inch MacBook Pro within the past year, so I probably won't need a new one for a long time. But whenever they do, I know that at least in the future, when I'm ready for a new laptop, I'll be able to upgrade to that. So I like the 16-inch because it's just, I need the size for the screen. If I'm working in something like After Effects, it's a big interface. I need a lot of screen space for something like After Effects. I do still plug into an external monitor when I'm at home, but if I'm on the road, I need a decent sized screen, and the 16-inch for me is useful for that. But if you're doing other types of design, you might not need a full 16-inch screen. So if you're getting into video editing, After Effects and Premiere, they're much more demanding. So faster computers, more RAM, like I would go with at least 16 or 32 gigs of RAM. On this computer here, I think I have 32. Yeah, so I got 32 gigs of RAM on this. And a dedicated graphics card. Don't go with just the integrated video card. It just doesn't work as well when you're doing video editing. You need a proper video card for that. If you're doing things like web design, it's not nearly as demanding. But for video stuff, it's more demanding. You need a faster one. Portfolios. So we've talked about the various different types of designs. Let's finish up with portfolios, and that will wrap it up for the session here. Portfolio sites. Here's just a bunch of different ones. I'm going to actually just open them up all in different tabs real quick here. And let's take a look at some of them. I wanted to show you a variety of different types of design and also pay attention to the way that they present their work. Because if you're going to build your own portfolio, it's not just about the work that goes in it, it's also how you present it. You want it to be an easy to use experience. You want them to be able to scroll through and see the kind of work that you do. And even before I go into any of these projects, I can already see that this is a good 3D designer. And if I want to, I can click on one of these and go check out more of this in greater detail. So he's a 3D designer, he or she actually, I'm not sure. And just nice, big, beautiful examples of nicely rendered 3D stuff. When I get to the bottom here, I can go right into the next project, which I appreciate not having to go back or having to scroll back up to the top. I could just click next and I go right into the next project. That's a nice usability thing. Here, again, nice, big, beautiful examples. Sometimes I do little rollovers for some of the things. So I can click on one of these. Nice, big, beautiful examples. They talk a little bit about the project, but just big, beautiful, nicely photographed examples, nicely laid out. And then if I get to the bottom, let's scroll all the way to the bottom here. They show a lot of examples here. At the bottom of every page is, again, my list of different projects. So I don't have to go back. I can just scroll to the bottom if I want to and go on to the next project. Now, if I don't want to scroll all the way down, of course, I can hit the back button to go back. But it's nice that they repeat that grid of projects at the bottom. This I included because it's such a simple portfolio in its presentation. There's no pages. It's just you scroll through the work. And so you don't have to make a complicated website. It can just be that you scroll through and you scroll through, and it can be a super simple presentation, just big examples. And you don't click, you don't go back and forth, you just scroll through and that's it. So you don't have to make a complicated website. It's about the quality of the work and just make sure that it's presented nicely. This is the work of a paper artist, and talk about amazing work. Like paper artistry, it's amazing. I like that it's a little bit of a funky kind of layout here where it's not an even grid, and they have kind of fun little rollovers, which make this look a little bit nice, a little bit different. And you can click onto any one of those and they show, again, nice, big, beautiful examples. And they actually show you some of the behind the scenes, just so you can see, like, if you didn't realize, these are all real physically made things. And then at the bottom, more projects. So again, I don't have to go back and I could just go into the next thing. This is a design agency as opposed to maybe a person trying to get a job at a company. This is a company offering their services. So they will feature like, hey, we did this work for this local newspaper. And you can read about what they did. Of course, they're going to show the work, but they're trying to get work from other companies. So they're going to kind of say what they did for them. And yes, you can go visit the website, but they're going to show the projects and kind of talk about what they did for that website and kind of promote themselves and say, like, these are the cool things we did. Actually, some of these don't have very many visuals. This one, though, I think does. This one has more visuals in it. Yeah, so this shows more of the process. So they're doing some user experience design. They have some cool animations. I like that they show those animations. That's nice. So this is more of a full project. I think that's nice. This one's just an interesting example as a web designer, adding some fun animation here, and then you can click into one of these and you can see nice big examples of the work again. For motion designers, then you're going to have a reel. A reel is going to show you in a video form what work is, because if you're doing animation, you got to show people the animation. And that animation can be, it can be infographics, it can be titles, it can be all sorts of work. I muted the audio just so that we don't have that coming over me talking here. But when you play this back, be sure to play it with the audio so you can hear the audio too. But just showing examples of the person's work. If you're doing video editing, with video editing, there's probably going to be sound, there's going to be video, and it's a matter of transitions and cuts. And again, I've muted the audio here, but you know, you'd want to listen to it with the audio to hear like the timing of the cuts, and it's much more exciting with the audio there. But it's more about the edits that you're making for the videos. So you'd have a reel, and that could be on your website, but it can also be on YouTube as well. So, final thoughts in wrapping all this stuff up, excuse me, wrapping up all this stuff is design as much as you can. If you're getting into this industry, you need to learn the apps and become good at them. And you need to learn design concepts and become a better designer. And practice makes perfect. This is how you become better at design. So, have fun as you're designing. You know, for me, I love this industry. I think it's a fun, exciting industry. I've been in it for over 20 years. I like what I do. I went to college for design. I got into it, and it's been an ever-changing industry. Things like going more digital from print, you know, but that's to me what makes it interesting is we evolve as designers, we learn new different areas of design, and I'm still in the same industry, even though I've migrated from doing some more print stuff in the beginning over to more web design and eventually doing video stuff. It's still it's a fun industry to be part of, and we can evolve with the industry. So we do have a variety of different certificate programs that you can choose from if you are interested in any of these different types of design. I hope this presentation has been useful for you to help figure out maybe what areas you want to go into and the apps that you'll need to learn to get into this. So for those of you who are in the live stream, I'm going to open up to questions for those of you who are here live. For anybody that's watching this recording, just want to say thanks for watching and hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you in a future class. We do offer these classes all live online, so they're all live streamed online classes. We're in New York City, so we do it all in Eastern Standard Time, but people can attend live from wherever they are. And so for most of the classes, it would be a screen share where you screen share into the instructor their computer, and you see what they're showing you, you hear them, kind of like we're doing this presentation here. But let's say I'm teaching a design program, I'm going to be showing you how to do the design program. And so you screen share in, you see what we're doing. For a lot of our classes, we have workbooks which are included with the class, and those are step-by-step workbooks which help you to get practice with the software. So there's training, there's practice. And then if there's like a portfolio development class, for example, in some of those classes, there's project-based stuff where you're working on your own specific projects. So it's a great way to learn and jumpstart and get your career going in this industry. So I hope this has been useful for you, and that it'll help you get started and get into design.